Behind a dense veil of secrecy, in the shadow of the majestic cathedrals and marble columns of the Vatican, lies an organization whose name is whispered even in the highest circles of the Catholic hierarchy. Opus Dei, God's work. For some, it is a path to holiness through daily labor. For others, a sinister web of influence that has entangled the corridors of power from Madrid to Rome. 1928, Spain on the brink of civil war. A young priest, Josemaría Escrivá, receives a divine revelation and founds an organization destined to become one of the most controversial in the history of modern Christianity. What is it? A spiritual brotherhood or a secret society? A religious order or a political tool? Why almost a century later does Opus Dei continue to evoke fear and admiration, suspicion and devotion? Strict discipline, mortification of the flesh, unquestioning obedience. These medieval practices exist at the heart of the modern world, hidden behind the facade of respectable educational institutions and charitable foundations. We embark on a journey behind the scenes of one of the most secretive organizations in the Catholic world, to find an answer to the question, where does faith end and control begin? Spain in the 1920s was a country of deep contrasts and unsettling premonitions. The monarchy tottered under the onslaught of republican ideas, and the Catholic Church lost influence in a society where the voices of secularism and anti-clericalism grew louder. It was at this critical juncture in history that the young priest Josemaría Escrivá de Balaguer experienced an event that would forever change not only his life, but also the face of modern Catholicism. On October 2, 1928, during a spiritual retreat in Madrid, Escrivá claimed to have heard bells, a divine revelation calling him to found a new path to holiness. "I saw Opus Dei," he would later write in his diaries. But what exactly did this 36-year-old priest see? Born into a modest family in Barbastro, Escrivá absorbed deep religiosity from childhood. After his father's death, he took responsibility for his family, combining studies with work. This school of life shaped his central idea: holiness is accessible to everyone through daily work and ordinary duties. The initial concept of Opus Dei radically differed from the traditional understanding of religious life. Escrivá asserted that lay people could achieve holiness not by entering a monastery, but by remaining in the world, in offices, universities, families. Sanctify your work. Sanctify yourselves through your work. Sanctify others through your work. This principle became the foundation of his teaching. His first followers were students from Madrid universities, young, educated, ambitious. Escrivá understood that to change society, one must start with its elite. In the years when Spain teetered on the brink of civil war, he created a structure that was intended to penetrate all spheres of public life, from education to politics. But behind the inspiring facade of holiness in everyday life lay contradictions. While calling for openness to the world, Escrivá created a closed organization with a rigid hierarchy and strict discipline. Preaching freedom of spirit, he demanded unquestioning obedience from his followers. Striving for the renewal of the Church, he insisted on a return to medieval practices of mortification of the flesh. Behind the facade of public statements and official documents lies the true structure of Opus Dei, a complex hierarchical system built like a pyramid, where each level has its own rights, responsibilities, and degree of initiation into the organization's secrets. This structure, developed by Escrivá himself, ensures both flexibility and strict control over all aspects of the order members' lives. At the apex of the pyramid is the prelate, the spiritual and administrative leader, possessing almost absolute power. After Escrivá's death in 1975, this position has been held only by selected followers, deeply devoted to the founder's original vision. The prelate is supported by the General Council for men and a separate Central Council for women, reflecting the strict gender division within the organization. Below in the hierarchy are three main categories of members. Numeraries, the elite of the order, fully dedicated to Opus Dei. They take vows of celibacy, live in special centers, and give almost all their income to the organization. It is the numeraries who occupy key positions in the structure and have access to internal decision-making mechanisms. Among them, Opus Dei priests, who undergo special training and ordination, are particularly distinguished. Supernumeraries, married members who live ordinary family lives, yet are deeply integrated into the organization's activities. They make regular donations and participate in spiritual practices, maintaining an outwardly ordinary lifestyle, which makes them ideal conduits for Opus Dei's influence in various social spheres. Associates, the least integrated category, including people who support the order's activities but do not undertake all obligations. They form an outer circle of influence, often not revealing their connection to the organization. A peculiarity of Opus Dei's structure is its invisibility to the outside world. Members of the order do not wear special clothing, do not use public titles, and often do not disclose their affiliation with the organization. This creates an effect of invisible presence, where influence is felt, but its source remains hidden. Internal communication is based on the principle of need to know. Each member receives only the information relevant to their level. Decisions are passed down from top to bottom, and feedback is strictly filtered at each level. This system ensures both the preservation of secrecy and effective management of a vast international network. Within the depths of Opus Dei's spiritual life, hide practices that evoke both admiration and alarm. Mortification of the flesh is not a medieval relic, but an everyday reality for many members of the organization. Numeraries regularly use the cilice, a rough cloth with thorns worn on the body for hours, and the discipline, a small braided cord for self-flagellation. These instruments of physical penance are kept in special cases in the bedrooms of the order's members. These practices, according to followers, have deep roots in Catholic tradition. Escrivá himself said, "The body must suffer so that the soul can ascend." However, critics see in this elements of psychological control, creating dependence through guilt and a constant physical reminder of submission. The spiritual regimen of an Opus Dei member is strictly regulated. Daily prayers, Mass, reading spiritual literature, weekly confession, everything is subject to a strict schedule. For numeraries living in the organization's centers, control extends to all aspects of life, from daily routine to personal correspondence. Even the choice of books and films passes through the filter of spiritual directors. A special role is played by the practice of spiritual conversation, a weekly confession to a spiritual director, where a member of the organization must reveal not only sins, but also their most intimate thoughts, doubts, and emotional attachments. This practice creates a situation of complete transparency of the inner world for the leadership. Proponents see in these practices a path to holiness through overcoming egoism and pride. Mortification of the flesh is not an end in itself, but a means of freeing the spirit from attachment to material things, explains one of Opus Dei's priests. Psychologists, however, point to the fine line between spiritual discipline and the destruction of personal boundaries. The principle of holy coercion appears particularly contradictory when spiritual directors make decisions for their charges, explaining it as a manifestation of divine will. Critics see in this a classic mechanism of mind control, where a person gradually loses the ability to make independent decisions. Even sleep and rest become instruments of spiritual growth. Numeraries sleep on hard boards inserted under the mattress, and some practice sleeping on the floor. These deprivations, according to Escrivá's teachings, help to constantly remember Christ's sacrifice and control bodily desires. From a small Spanish organization to a global force within the Catholic Church, Opus Dei's path to legitimization and recognition was a strategically calibrated march across continents and ecclesiastical structures. After the Spanish Civil War, when the Franco regime established close ties with the Catholic Church, Escrivá understood that for his movement to survive, it needed to expand beyond a single country. In 1946, he moved to Rome, the heart of the Catholic world. This move was not accidental. Proximity to the Vatican allowed Escrivá to personally advance the interests of his organization in the highest ecclesiastical circles. The first official recognition came quickly. Just a year later, the Holy See issued the decree Primum Institutum, granting Opus Dei the status of a secular institute, an unprecedented case in the history of the Church. Expansion continued rapidly. Portugal and Italy, then France and Ireland. By the 50s, Mexico and the USA. By the 60s, Japan and Kenya. This geographical strategy was not chaotic. Countries with strong Catholic traditions or promising regions with political instability, where influence could be gained, were chosen. A key moment in the organization's history was the Second Vatican Council in the 60s. Paradoxically, the inherently conservative Opus Dei benefited maximally from the liberal reforms of the Council. The new emphasis on the role of the laity in the Church perfectly coincided with what Escrivá had preached from the very beginning. His representatives actively participated in the Council's work, promoting their vision and establishing valuable connections. The true triumph came during the pontificate of John Paul II. In 1982, Opus Dei received the unique status of a personal prelature, essentially a separate diocese, not tied to a geographical territory, but uniting people based on their affiliation with the organization. This decision caused shock in ecclesiastical circles. For the first time in history, a secular organization received rights comparable to a diocese, while remaining practically independent of local bishops. Behind this unprecedented decision were years of painstaking work and strategic alliances. Connections with Cardinal Karol Wojtyła, the future John Paul II, established long before his election as Pope, played a special role. They were united by a common anti-communist stance and a vision of the Church as an active force in the modern world. The culmination of recognition was the beatification of Josemaría Escrivá in 1992 and his canonization in 2000, one of the fastest in the history of the Church. Critics called it a political decision, pointing to the unprecedented speed of the process and the influence of Opus Dei members in Vatican structures. Behind the impressive facades of elite universities and respectable business centers lies the complex economic empire of Opus Dei, whose financial tentacles penetrate various spheres of the global economy. The organization, declaring spiritual goals, possesses an impressive material foundation, which raises a natural question. Why does a religious order need such significant assets? Educational institutions are the cornerstone of Opus Dei's economic strategy. There are over 700 schools, colleges, and universities worldwide connected to the organization. Flagship projects: the University of Navarre in Spain and the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross in Rome are not only prestigious educational institutions, but also powerful financial structures with multi-million euro turnovers. The annual income of these two institutions alone exceeds 150 million euros. A distinctive feature of Opus Dei's business model is the creation of elite educational centers for the children of the political and economic elite. Tuition fees at such institutions can reach tens of thousands of euros per year. Officially, these institutions often have no direct connection with the order, although they are managed by its members or trusted individuals. The second source of funding is an extensive network of business structures, banks in Latin America, investment funds in Europe, construction companies in Africa. The geography of Opus Dei's business interests is impressive. Documented links exist with financial groups such as Banco Popular in Spain and a number of investment companies in Switzerland. The contributions of the organization's members play a special role. Numeraries give almost all their income, retaining only a minimum for personal needs. Given that many of them hold high-paying positions in prestigious companies and government structures, this amount forms a significant financial flow. Opus Dei's economic model is built on the principle of self-reinforcement. Money is invested in educational projects that attract new, influential members, whose contributions and connections bring new investment opportunities. This spiral ensures a continuous growth of influence and capital. Critics accuse the organization of creating a global shadow economic network, operating in the interests of a narrow circle of individuals. Former members speak of hidden accounts, offshore structures, and opaque financial transactions. The practice of using front people, Opus Dei members formerly unconnected to the organization but acting in its interests in various economic structures, is particularly sharply criticized. However, it is almost impossible to assess the true scale of Opus Dei's financial power. The organization does not publish consolidated financial statements, and most of its associated structures are legally independent. Experts estimate the order's total assets at billions of euros, but the exact figure remains a matter of speculation. Opus Dei's political influence began in Franco's Spain, when members of the organization held key government posts. The Opus Dei technocrats, nicknamed Saints in Suits, carried out economic reforms that brought the country out of isolation in the 1960s. Economy Minister Alberto Ullastres and other cabinet members associated with the order shaped a new course that combined Catholic conservatism with economic pragmatism. With the fall of the Franco regime, many predicted the decline of the organization's political influence. But the opposite happened. Opus Dei transformed its strategy and expanded its geographical reach. In Latin America, members of the order held high posts in the governments of Chile, Peru, and Argentina, especially during periods of dictatorships. Notable is the case of Chilean economist José Piñera, an Opus Dei member and minister under Pinochet, the architect of neoliberal reforms. In contemporary Europe, the organization's influence is less overt, but more subtle. The presence of Opus Dei members in the European Parliament, the European Commission, and national governments has been documented. Their positions are particularly strong in Spain, Italy, and Poland, countries with deep Catholic traditions. However, politicians rarely openly declare their affiliation with the order, preferring to identify themselves simply as practicing Catholics. Does Opus Dei have a coherent political agenda? Officially, the organization denies political ambitions, emphasizing that its members act as private individuals according to their own convictions. Opus Dei has no political position. Our mission is spiritual, not political, states an official representative of the order. However, an analysis of the political activities of the organization's members reveals consistent patterns. They consistently oppose abortion, euthanasia, and same-sex marriage, and support the traditional family model and religious education. In economic matters, there is a leaning towards a free market, with elements of the Catholic Church's social doctrine. Special attention should be paid to the strategy of a long march through the institutions, the systematic advancement of its members to key positions in the judiciary, education, media, and international organizations. Former members claim that there are unwritten directives for career advancement, where positions with maximum public influence are considered preferable. However, Opus Dei's political influence should not be overestimated. the organization is often accused of conspiracies and manipulations that lack documentary evidence. The real picture is more complex. It is a network of like-minded individuals with common values, acting in concert, but not always centrally. Within the structure of Opus Dei, women hold a special, strictly regulated position. Gender segregation is not merely an organizational principle, but a fundamental ideological tenet stemming from the founder himself. Josemaría Escrivá, raised in the traditional Spanish environment of the early 20th century, laid the foundation for his organization with a clear distinction between male and female roles, reflecting his understanding of the divine design of societal structure. Women's centers of Opus Dei are physically separated from men's, with their own hierarchy and management system, yet remain under the overall leadership of male priests. This segregation is justified by the need to maintain purity and prevent temptations, but critics see it as a tool of control and subjugation. Particularly strict rules apply in women's houses, from a dress code prohibiting trousers and requiring modest attire, to the regulation of social contacts. Former numerary Maria del Carmen Tapia, who left the organization after 18 years of service, describes the shocking reality of women's lives in Opus Dei in her memoirs, Beyond the Threshold. We were taught that our main virtue was obedience, and our highest purpose was to serve the men of the order. Women numeraries, who have taken a vow of celibacy, are often assigned as housekeepers in men's centers, where they are responsible for cooking, cleaning, and laundry. This practice, called administration, is presented as an honorable service, but effectively reinforces traditional gender roles. Significantly, women in Opus Dei do not have access to higher theological education, which is reserved for men. Instead, they are taught domestic science, etiquette, and the basics of Catholic faith necessary for raising children. Internal documents of the organization, made public through former members, contain direct instructions. A woman finds her true calling in motherhood, physical or spiritual. In the contemporary context of the struggle for gender equality, such a stance appears anachronistic. But Opus Dei not only does not deviate from these principles, but actively promotes them through its educational and social programs. The practice of self-denial among female members of the organization appears particularly controversial. Physical mortification of the flesh, including the use of bacillus and self-flagellation, is applied to women with particular rigor, ostensibly to overcome female weakness and emotionality. Catherine Mulgrew, a former supernumerary from the USA, recounts, "We were taught that our pain was a gift to God and an atonement for the sinfulness of female nature." Defenders of the organization argue that women in Opus Dei make a free choice, following a traditional model of Catholic femininity. There is no coercion here, only the joy of following one's true calling, says Maria Jesus Marino, a current member of the Women's Council in Spain. However, critics point to psychological mechanisms that make this choice far from free. Young women, often attracted to the organization through elite schools and colleges, are gradually isolated from alternative views on the role of women in society. Behind the impressive facades of elite universities and prestigious educational centers lies a meticulously crafted recruiting system by Opus Dei. The search for new members is not a random process, but a strategic operation aimed at attracting the most promising young people from the upper echelons of society. University campuses become the primary field of activity for the organization's recruiters, especially elite educational institutions where future leaders in business, politics, and science are concentrated. Initial contact often occurs through student clubs, educational seminars, or Bible study groups. These meetings appear to be ordinary university events, but in reality, they are carefully organized entry points. They never immediately say it's related to Opus Dei, recalls Miguel, a former student at the University of Madrid. At first, it's just friendly gatherings, discussions about philosophy, help with studies. Only later do you realize you're gradually being drawn into the organization's orbit. The candidate selection process resembles high-level corporate recruiting. Potential members are evaluated on a multitude of criteria: academic performance, social background, family connections, psychological stability, and susceptibility to influence. Special attention is paid to finding individuals with leadership qualities, yet idealistic enough and seeking spiritual guidance. A crucial element of the strategy is identifying personal weaknesses or unmet needs. Students experiencing identity crises, loneliness away from home, or academic difficulties become priority targets. They pinpoint what you need with astonishing accuracy, says Anna, a former member of the organization. If you lack social interaction, they offer a community. If you seek meaning, they provide a mission. If you need structure, they ensure a clear routine. The psychological methods of persuasion used by recruiters include gradual immersion, the love bombing technique, and the creation of cognitive dissonance. Newcomers are surrounded by heightened attention and care, creating a sense of exclusivity and chosenness. Simultaneously, a perception is formed of the outside world as a place of spiritual decay, from which the organization offers protection. The tactic of mentorship proves particularly effective, where a specially selected Opus Dei member, close in temperament and interests, works with a potential candidate. These relationships gradually transform from friendly to spiritual mentoring, creating emotional dependence and a sense of duty. My mentor became like an older brother to me, recalls Carlos, who spent 7 years in the organization. I trusted him with absolutely everything, and when he suggested I become part of Opus Dei, refusal felt like a betrayal of our friendship. Accusations of deliberately seeking influential or promising young people are well-founded. Internal documents that have become public contain direct instructions about prioritizing the recruitment of students in specific fields: law, economics, medicine, engineering. There are also special programs for working with children from influential families, starting from adolescence. In a world where information has become the primary currency of influence, Opus Dei demonstrates masterful command of the art of shaping its public image. Beneath an outward appearance of openness and accessibility lies a complex system of information control, allowing the organization to effectively manage how it is perceived both within and outside the Catholic world. The official website of Opus Dei is a model of modern religious communication. Concise design, professional photographs of smiling people from various professions, stories of success and spiritual transformation. We strive for transparency, states Jack Valero, communications director for the organization's British branch. However, hidden behind this facade of openness is a carefully calculated strategy of information dosage. Internal documents obtained by journalists reveal the existence of detailed instructions for members of the organization on how to interact with the outside world. The External Communications Guide, circulated among numeraries, contains ready-made answers to difficult questions and recommendations on how to avoid uncomfortable topics. Special attention is paid to dealing with criticism. Members of the organization must remain calm and benevolent, but at the same time, not engage in discussions on matters beyond their competence. Within Opus Dei centers, special media teams monitor all mentions of the organization in the press and social media. Upon discovery of critical material, a multi-level response system is activated, from letters to the editor to personal meetings with journalists and publishers. A former employee of a European publishing house recalls, "After the publication of a critical article, we were literally deluged with letters. Then came calls from respected lawyers and professors who had connections with the organization. The pressure was polite but persistent. Particularly interesting is the strategy for dealing with former members who decide to speak publicly about their experiences. A document known as Protocol R describes methods for minimizing reputational damage, including discrediting critics by pointing to their psychological problems or personal motives. They create a vacuum of trust around the critic, explains Maria Angustias Moreno, author of the book Opus Dei, Back to the Middle Ages. Notably, after the release of Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, the organization fundamentally changed its communication strategy, moving from secrecy to controlled openness. Open days were organized at Opus Dei centers. Educational programs for journalists were launched, and a special information portal was created to refute myths. This campaign was recognized by public relations experts as one of the most successful examples of reputational crisis management. However, the most effective tool for information control remains the organization's structure itself. Strict hierarchy and the principle of need to know ensure that even most ordinary members do not have a complete understanding of the internal mechanisms and the true scope of Opus Dei's activities. As one researcher of the phenomenon of closed organizations noted, the genius of their system is that each member simultaneously becomes both an object and a subject of information control, genuinely transmitting to the outside world only the picture they are allowed to see. Over the decades of its existence, Opus Dei has found itself at the center of numerous scandals, each of which, like a stone thrown into dark water, generated waves of rumors, speculations, and journalistic investigations. But what lies behind these stories? Real transgressions or a targeted campaign of discrediting? The most serious accusations are related to psychological pressure on members of the organization. Former numerary Tammy DiNicola, who left the order after 7 years of service, published detailed memoirs about mind control methods. We were gradually cut off from the outside world. Letters were reviewed, phone calls were monitored. Any doubt was interpreted as a temptation of the devil. Her testimonies, collected in the book Beyond the Walls of Opus Dei, provoked a wave of similar confessions from former members from different countries. Financial scandals also plagued the organization. In the early 2000s, a Spanish court heard a case regarding alleged money laundering through structures linked to Opus Dei. Although no direct evidence of the order's leadership involvement was found, several defendants in the case turned out to be supernumeraries. Later, similar accusations arose in Mexico and Peru, where charitable foundations affiliated with the organization were found to be involved in dubious financial schemes. Of particular concern are testimonies about mistreatment in the organization's women's centers. Maria del Carmen Tapia, who held a high position in the women's section, after leaving Opus Dei, spoke about practices of isolation and humiliation of women who refused to follow all prescriptions. The disobedient could be deprived of communication, medical care, and forced to do the dirtiest work. It was a system aimed at breaking the will, Tapia asserts. The leadership of Opus Dei responds to such accusations with a refined strategy. The first line of defense is denial. This is a distortion of facts by people unable to understand the spiritual depth of our calling. The second is minimization. These are isolated cases that do not reflect the general practice. The third is shifting attention to the positive aspects of the organization's activities. A characteristic example is the reaction to the scandal in Chile, where one of the priests of Opus Dei was accused of inappropriate behavior with minors. Instead of an immediate investigation, the leadership transferred the priest to another country and then launched a large-scale campaign to promote the order's educational projects in poor areas of Santiago. It is noteworthy that many critics of the organization face systematic attempts at discrediting. After publishing revealing materials, journalist Sarah Corbett found that her professional reputation was under attack. Suddenly, articles began appearing in various publications questioning my competence and ethics. My former colleagues were called, asking about my personal life. Internal documents obtained by researchers indicate the existence of special protocols for managing reputational risks. These protocols prescribe the active involvement of lawyers, friendly journalists, and influential supporters to neutralize criticism. Special attention is paid to working with internet sources. The organization maintains teams of specialists who monitor and correct information online. In 2003, the world changed for Opus Dei. Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, appeared on bookshelves, instantly becoming a bestseller and transforming the little-known Catholic organization into a central element of global pop culture. Suddenly, millions of people who had never heard of the order were presented with a ready-made image, that of a sinister brotherhood of fanatics, ready to do anything to protect ancient church secrets. The albino monk Silas, with a metal belt digging into his flesh, became a symbol of cruelty and religious fanaticism in the public consciousness. The leadership of Opus Dei found itself in an unprecedented situation. Decades of carefully cultivated image as a respectable organization crumbled under the onslaught of fiction. The initial reaction was predictably negative. "It's a caricature that has nothing to do with reality," stated then Press Secretary of the Order, Brian Finnerty. Catholic publications were filled with scathing articles pointing out numerous factual errors in the novel, from the non-existent vow of celibacy for all Opus Dei members to fantastic descriptions of mortification rituals. However, the strategy soon changed. The Order's leadership realized that the unprecedented public interest could be used to their advantage. The Da Vinci Code opened a window of opportunity for an organization that had avoided publicity for decades. "This is our chance to tell the truth about ourselves," admitted one of Opus Dei's communication directors in a private conversation. A large-scale information campaign began. The organization's centers around the world opened their doors to journalists. Special websites debunking the book's myths were launched, and representatives of the Order became frequent guests on TV shows and radio programs. The film adaptation of the novel in 2006, starring Tom Hanks, only amplified the effect. Visits to the official Opus Dei website increased tenfold, and the number of inquiries about joining the organization rose by 30%. People came out of curiosity, attracted by the scandalous fame, but many stayed, discovering something completely different from what they expected, recalls one of the heads of the Spanish branch. Paradoxically, the novel, intended to blacken the organization, contributed to its growth and the modernization of its communication strategies. However, the Da Vinci Code effect also had long-term negative consequences. The line between fiction and reality in the public consciousness became blurred. Studies showed that a significant portion of readers perceived Brown's fiction as a documentary description. For many, the image of Opus Dei forever merged with the image of a secret society controlling the Vatican and ready to commit murder to maintain its power. Academic studies of this phenomenon revealed an interesting pattern. The less a person knew about Opus Dei before reading the book, the more likely they were to perceive its descriptions as accurate. This created a situation where the organization had to fight not against criticism of its real activities, but against a fantastic image created by a writer. "We found ourselves in the position of someone trying to prove they're not a werewolf," one of the Order's representatives quipped bitterly. Beyond sensational headlines and emotional debates, there exists an academic perspective on Opus Dei, an attempt at objective analysis of this organization using the methods of modern science. Sociologists of religion and group psychologists have for decades studied the phenomenon of this Catholic movement, striving to separate facts from myths, real practices from rumors and conjectures. Their work is particularly valuable in the context of the informational noise surrounding the organization. Professor Joan Estebanel from the University of Barcelona, who has dedicated 20 years to researching new religious movements, notes, The scientific community is divided in its assessments of Opus Dei. Some researchers classify it as a conservative Catholic movement within the traditional church structure, while others see in it signs of a totalitarian cult disguised as Orthodox Catholicism. Debates continue in academic circles about how to correctly classify Opus Dei from the perspective of the sociology of religion. Researcher Maria Angustias Moreno applies to the organization the total institution model developed by Irving Goffman, a structure that completely controls all aspects of its members' lives. According to her data, numeraries of Opus Dei exhibit all the characteristics of such an institution: physical isolation, strict regulation of daily life, a system of punishments and rewards, and the blurring of personal boundaries. The opposite position is held by British sociologist Brian Wilson, who argues that Opus Dei should be viewed in the context of traditional Catholic renewal movements that have emerged throughout church history. He points to historical parallels with the Dominicans and Jesuits, who in their time also aroused suspicion and accusations of excessive influence. A particular methodological challenge for researchers is the organization's closed nature. Studying Opus Dei is like studying an iceberg, observing only its tip, notes French psychologist Michel Legrand. Access to internal documents, practices, and real statistics is strictly limited. Researchers must rely on the testimonies of former members, which are often emotionally colored, or on the organization's official publications, which present an idealized picture. Interesting results are yielded by psychological studies of Opus Dei members and those who have left the organization. Dr. Carmen Guete from the University of Madrid conducted a series of interviews with former numeraries, identifying patterns characteristic of people leaving closed religious groups: cognitive dissonance, problems with self-identification, and difficulties in building new social connections. At the same time, she notes significant differences in the experiences of men and women who left the order. Empirical data on the functioning of Opus Dei remains fragmented. According to official statistics, the organization has about 90,000 members worldwide. But independent researchers question this figure, pointing to the blurred criteria for membership for supernumeraries and associates. The organization's influence in the educational sphere is reliably established. Hundreds of educational institutions of various levels are under its direct or indirect control. Scientific consensus regarding Opus Dei has not yet been reached, which reflects both the complexity of the phenomenon itself and the ideological polarization within academic circles. As Italian religious scholar Massimo Introvigne notes, the science of religion always balances between the desire for objectivity and the influence of the researcher's personal beliefs. In the case of Opus Dei, this problem manifests itself particularly acutely. In the world of the Catholic Church, there are many movements and organizations, each with its own charism and approach to spiritual life. Opus Dei is often perceived as a unique phenomenon, but how justified is this opinion? A comparative analysis with other influential Catholic movements reveals both common features and fundamental differences in their nature and methods of operation. The Legionaries of Christ, founded by the Mexican priest Marcial Maciel in 1941, largely resemble Opus Dei in their hierarchical structure and focus on elites. Both organizations prioritize education and working with wealthy segments of society, and both are characterized by a conservative interpretation of Catholic doctrine. However, there is a fundamental difference between them. The Legionaries are a classic religious order with priests and religious, while Opus Dei was created specifically as a movement for laypeople. Furthermore, the Legionaries of Christ experienced a serious crisis after the exposure of their founders' sexual crimes, which led to a deep reform of the organization under the direct control of the Vatican. The neo-catechumenal way created by the Spaniard Kiko Arguello in the 1960s, represents a completely different model. This movement is oriented towards renewing parish life through the formation of small communities, reminiscent of early Christian groups. Unlike the closed structure of Opus Dei, the neo-catechumenal way is emphatically open and oriented towards all strata of society, especially marginalized groups. The methods of spiritual formation also differ. Instead of the individual mentorship and strict discipline of Opus Dei, here, collective liturgical actions and communal problem-solving are practiced. The community of Sant'Egidio, founded in Rome in 1968, demonstrates yet another alternative approach. Its priorities, social service, peacemaking, and interreligious dialogue, contrast with Opus Dei's emphasis on personal holiness and influence through professional activity. The community is known for its work with the homeless, migrants, and refugees, as well as mediation in international conflicts. There is no rigid hierarchy and strict obligations here. Community members retain a high degree of autonomy, which fundamentally differs from the system of control in Opus Dei. What makes Opus Dei truly unique among Catholic movements? Firstly, it is its legal status as a personal prelature, the only structure of its kind in canon law. Secondly, the unprecedented degree of integration into secular institutions while maintaining religious identity. Thirdly, the combination of strict medieval asceticism with active participation in the modern world. Finally, it is the high degree of secrecy and control, alongside external respectability and normality. A comparison with other Catholic movements shows that Opus Dei occupies a unique niche between traditional religious orders and modern lay movements, combining elements of both types of organizations. This hybrid nature allows it to adapt to various social and cultural contexts while maintaining its identity and internal integrity. It is this combination of conservatism and adaptability that makes Opus Dei both an attractive and controversial phenomenon in the modern Catholic Church. Our journey through the labyrinths of Opus Dei is drawing to a close, and it is time to piece together the scattered fragments of this complex mosaic. What truly is this organization? A holy path to spiritual perfection, or a secret network of influence in the corridors of power? As we have seen, Opus Dei exists at the intersection of contradictions. On one hand, there is the sincere faith of thousands of followers striving for holiness through daily work. On the other, a rigid hierarchical structure with elements of psychological control, giving rise to legitimate concerns. Perhaps the main feature of Opus Dei is its astonishing adaptability. An organization founded in conservative Spain in the 1920s has not only survived, but thrived in a radically changed world. While remaining faithful to medieval practices of mortification of the flesh and strict discipline, it simultaneously masterfully utilizes modern communication and management technologies. The future of Opus Dei is inextricably linked to the future of the Catholic Church, which is undergoing a period of profound transformation. The pontificate of Francis, with its emphasis on social justice and openness to the world, presents new challenges for an organization traditionally oriented towards conservative values and elitism. Will Opus Dei be able to adapt to these changes while preserving its identity? No less important is the question of how Opus Dei will fit into the changing global context. In a world where traditional hierarchies are losing influence and transparency is becoming a key value, closed organizations elicit increasing distrust. Can the order overcome its instinctive secrecy and open itself to external scrutiny without losing its essence? Returning to the fundamental question of the boundary between sincere spiritual devotion and manipulation of consciousness, we must admit, there is no single answer. This boundary runs not so much between organizations as within them, and within each person. For some, Opus Dei becomes a path to genuine holiness, a structured system of spiritual growth in a chaotic world. For others, it is a gilded cage where free will is sacrificed for a collective vision. And often, this depends not so much on the organization itself, as on the specific individuals who embody its principles on the ground. Perhaps the most important lesson of our research is the need for critical thinking and personal responsibility. In a world where information is simultaneously excessive and unreliable, the ability to ask questions and seek one's own answers becomes not just an intellectual exercise, but a vital necessity. Opus Dei will remain in history as a unique phenomenon, a mirror reflecting both the deep human need for spiritual guidance and the dangers inherent in unconditional submission to external authority. And it is up to each of us to decide what we see in this mirror: a path to perfection or the shadow of control.